Greville Pabst from Greville Pabst Property Advisory. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
G'day, Mark. How are you?
Good, thank you. I seem to recall probably the last time I saw you was at one of our conferences. Would that be right? We haven't been able to hold those all that many these days, but hopefully we're going to have one next year. But how are you going, all right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, I love that up in the Hunter Valley, and spoken to quite a few of your Yellow Brick Road brokers and so forth, and it was great. It's great.
And you're living in Victoria now, right?
Yep.
But your business does property advisory and valuations around the country. But I guess, and we're talking to mostly now mortgage brokers. I guess what's one of the reasons, I know one of the reasons we wanted you on the program is because everybody's asking what's happening in property prices, not just in Victoria, but just generally speaking. And it's best for us to talk to the experts because, we all think we know, us mortgage guys think we all know about property price, but we don't. And so what are you feeling? Let's start off with Victoria for a start. What are you feeling for down there? In other words, how's Victoria holding up, as having had the longest lockdown anywhere in the world, as I understand it? And what effect is that having on property prices generally?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. We've been locked down for, I'm envious of the guys in Sydney, that's for sure. We've been locked down. But look, the real estate industry's adapted. Like, it's incredible how they've adapted it. It's been a little bit like magic. I mean, they've sold properties to people that have not even seen them, haven't been able to walk through them. It's only been probably in the last 2 weeks where, we've been able to go back to one-on-one property inspections. Now, the pent-up demand is enormous. There's a real lot of steam behind this market. And, like all the other capital cities in Australia, we've grown, 20-odd%. And that's median house price. So you know what that means for inner circle prime real estate. It's gone probably 30% for it to go 20% median. But it's a little bit of a two-tiered market. It's not so much, it's all about family homes. So the whole...
Not apartments.
No, it's not apartments. Apartments, particularly student accommodation, we don't have all of the overseas students and migration back, so that market's still very subdued. High-rise is subdued, student accommodation, moderate increases in the older style apartments, but really this story is all about family homes. And they are in huge demand. And one of the things that I do in my business is help my clients buy property, and it's hard. It's hard for me to get out there and buy property.
Do you mind if I just throw a few questions around? Let's just talk about Victoria for the time, because that represents probably close to 30% of the national numbers in terms of the total numbers of the country, and so it's not a bad litmus test, but for the fact that you've been locked down for longer than everybody else. But ordinarily it is. So when we talk about property prices going up, say 20% or 15 to 20% in a 12-month period in, say, Victoria, you are talking about is that the average median price of all properties in Victoria, or is it the average median price of just houses?
No, that's the median price of houses.
Houses, not apartments as well. So it's not the average of both. Right.
It's just houses. And this is where people can get confused. They look at the median and they say, it's gone 20%, but it's not entirely true. There's some areas that have gone 30, 40% in the last year, and others haven't performed at all.
Right. Okay.
I think the thing is too, we need to, and I was actually we did a question and answer with one of the heads of property at NAB the other day, and he was saying, Greville, how do you compare 1989 to now? And there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. But the real interesting thing is that if we look at only 4 years ago, if we look at 2018, we had property prices in Sydney and in Melbourne fell by 11 or 12%. And then in 2019, the election year, after the result of the election, prices then rose by about 7%. And then COVID year, 2020, we fell again 6 or 7%. So, even if you take into account 20% rise this year, in the last 4 years, we've averaged 8% growth. Like, not per annum, total 8% growth over 4 years. So, the question is, yeah, we've had a big year, but if you look at, and you have to look at property this way, you have to look at it over a horizon of, say, 10 years. And over the last 4, including this 20%, we're only 8% up.
Right, that's interesting. And if when you say, and it's out there in the system that property prices in some major capital cities and also in a lot of regional areas for house prices, the median price has increased by 15 to 20%, and some, 15 to 20%. Are there a lot of transactions as well? Are we saying, or is it fair to say we are having the equal number of transactions that we would have in an ordinary non-COVID year, or are these price rises associated with low numbers of transactions?
Yeah, look, definitely the latter. We're seeing historically very low transaction numbers, and that's really contributing to this growth. There's a lot of people just nervous about the current situation. Do they want to put their property up for sale when nobody can inspect it, or do they want to do an auction over Zoom? Most people, I think, want to get people through their property to see it, and they want to have a traditional sense. So a lot of people have been, are conservative, and of course, a lot of people have to sell. It's those 3 Ds. It's debt, divorce, and
debt.
Debt, divorce, and I can't think of the other D, but
but debt will do. And death. So if because if we somehow adjusted it for adjusted the price rise for the number of transactions that you would ordinarily expect in a rational year, because I'd say fair to say we've had an irrational period, then maybe that meteoric 15 to 20% rise in the two Melbourne and Sydney may be a lot less. Like if there were all of a sudden, let's say you're doing 100 a month, when ordinarily there'd be 200 a month, maybe that if there's more stock on the marketplace, then the price rises may not be as meteoric, and maybe that's the case.
Well, it comes down to, I think, there is this fear at the moment that if I sell my house, I'm maybe not going to be able to buy back in. So people are holding, staying where they are. They're maybe instead they're doing renovations to their property. I think our children are staying at home longer. They've all come back to the nest. So, and it's now getting expensive for them to go and enter the market. So, I think we've really consolidated, the position. So there's not a lot of need to sell when you think about it. When you look at unemployment rates being so low, there's some people have lost their jobs, yes, but if we look at unemployment, it's still pretty good. And if you look at interest rate, the cost of holding real estate is low by historical standards. So, there's no tension in this market to sell other than those reasons I said before. Like there's not the aspirational, there are some aspirational purchases, but most people are staying there. So there's no tension. To have a sale, you need tension. So you have low rates, you still have your job. And so most people, because of this uncertainty, they're sort of staying where they are. They're staying put because of the uncertainty.
That's interesting, because to have a perfect market or a proper market, you need both a willing buyer and a willing seller. Clearly, there's a lot of willing buyers. I'd say the demand is there, because the demand is obviously telling us that in terms of price rises that's the case. But to be a willing seller, and just to maybe touch on a few of the things you just said there, to be a willing seller, you've either got to sell and for financial reasons, and as you indicated there, that interest rates are historically low, so there's not that much pressure on people to sell because they have to sell. The job numbers are okay. They're not pre this last round of COVID, we're not far off where we were post-COVID. In other words, in fact, in the national numbers in terms of unemployment were below where we were pre-COVID, once we had that little recovery at the beginning of this calendar year. So unemployment or not having a job is also not a pressure to create a willing seller. And as you said, it's if I sell today, I've got to go buy somewhere else. And what's the point of selling if I'm going to buy the same thing? I'm only going to pay stamp duty and go through all the transactional bullshit. Whereas, and the only way I can buy a bigger, better place is my income's gone up. And we do know in this country that we've had a wage recession for 10 years. So people used to buy or upgrade because their wages went up and they can afford more, afford to borrow more money, and they therefore go and buy a more expensive place. I guess there are willing sellers in the downsizing environment where people have the, I don't know, $10 million place now in some place in Victoria and decide they want to buy a smaller joint in a regional area and they want to bank the difference. I mean, there's a bit of that, I guess. Are you experiencing that from a willing seller point of view?
Yeah, look, I think one of the main contributors to all of this is that there is an acute shortage of housing stock. We're simply not building enough. And if you look at now the cost of construction, I mean, I'm hearing stories of developers saying to homeowners that sign building contracts to tear up their building contracts because builders can't afford to build for what the building contractor said, because steel prices have gone through the roof, concrete prices have gone.
Timber.
You can't get timber. You just cannot get it. In fact, now builders are trying to do steel frame. So, the cost of construction is going, absolutely through the roof. But so, we're just not building enough, particularly of the type of stock that we need, which is family homes.
It's very interesting. It's and what can you tell us about regional demand for regional buying? So obviously we know that a lot of regional areas are doing very well, particularly here in New South Wales. I can't speak for Victoria. But where are the areas that you are seeing demand, and what are the reasons why people buy in regional areas? I mean, is it because of hospitals, airports, schools? What drives the demand into those regional areas?
Look, if you can be by the beach and you've got a good internet connection, you can work, and that's the driver. It's lifestyle, and it was affordability, but not anymore. So that, like in New South Wales, Melbournians have just gone to the Mornington Peninsula, right? And they've gone to the Ballarat Peninsula to be close to the beach. It's only an hour away, and it's highly desirable. As I said, if they've got an internet connection, they can work. Wouldn't you rather work by the beach or in a tree train situation, or be in a in a city that's had high COVID numbers? I know where I'd rather be.
Yeah, and it also gets locked down like pretty heavily. I know here in New South Wales, like the price of property in areas like Ballina, which is about 8 hours drive north of Sydney, 1 hour flight. Ballina, I'm not even going to mention Byron Bay because that's just out of control, but Ballina, Lennox Heads, Evans Heads, and all those sorts of areas around that territory. The average price or the median price of a house is nearly as much as it is in Sydney. And the reason people is because they say, well, we can live, like you just say, I'd rather live there and work there and commute to Sydney when I need to, because I can do everything I can do in Sydney from that address, from that residence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's outperformed regional in Victoria, and I think in New South Wales, it's outperformed the Melbourne metropolitan and the Sydney metropolitan areas. It's actually regional for the first time, since I've been in real estate over 30 years. Regional has compounded over long-term horizons of 4 to 5%. I'm talking about Geelong, Bendigo, Ballarat, those sorts of places. 4 to 5%. They're now outperforming, the Melbourne median. So we've seen seen growth in some of those areas like Sorrento, Portsea, anywhere between 30% and 100%.
Wow. Okay, so if I don't know how old your kids are, but like if you were saying to your kids, let's say they were 18 years of age, and they just started their first job and they're starting to save up money to get a deposit to buy a joint, where would you be telling them to invest in terms of affordability and what will make a good investment? It doesn't have to be in Victoria; it can be in South Australia. But what would you say to your kids?
Well, I'm having that conversation now. Both of them have followed me into real estate, and my youngest is 24, and yeah, he's been pre-approved and he's looking to buy something, and so yeah, he's looking at getting maybe going to somewhere like Geelong, a regional area, and he wants to buy something, rent it out for a little bit, and then down the track, knock the house over and do 2 or 3 townhouses. But $1 million, it doesn't buy very much in Sydney or in Melbourne. So, I think probably one of the best things to do if you can't afford a house is to look at the next best thing, which is a townhouse. And if you can't afford a townhouse, the next best thing is a villa unit, because the villa unit, you get a bit of land around it, 300 square metres of land around it, low density. And if you can't afford that, you go to an older style flat, low rise with low owners corporation fees, a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom, still with all of those amenities, all of the transport infrastructure, the schools. The village is so important now to our lifestyle, so to be able to walk to the villages, get a coffee, go to a restaurant and walk home, and those sorts of things that drive, the attributes that drive value. So they're the sorts of things that I'm saying, not only to my kids, but to my clients.
That's very interesting. So you sort of put it into a hierarchy there, and is the reason why high rise? I don't want to be picking on anything, but high rise apartments in metropolitan areas where there's lots of other high rise apartments may well fit at the bottom of the list. Is that because the rental returns ordinarily rely upon overseas students and lots of activity from overseas to fill them up and to get the yield, the rental yield? Is that part of the reason, or is it just too many of them in existence? Is there too much supply?
It's all about scarcity, right? Real estate is like any other asset class. If we look at classic cars, the 1950s air-cooled Porsches, look what it costs to buy one of those now, or muscle car. It's the scarcity that drives its value. It's the same with fine art. You're going to buy an Olsen or a Blackman painting. It's scarce. So that's what drives values in all asset classes, and it's the same with property. So I'm looking for property that is low density. I'm looking at it that it's got 13-foot ceilings, fireplaces in every room. Walls tenants can't kick in. That's the sort of stuff that I'm looking for. Must have car space, must have good floor plan, must have a reasonable level of size and condition about it. So, the reason these high-rise apartments, don't work, they work from a lifestyle point of view, but they don't work from a scarcity point of view, and therefore they don't go up in value as quickly as other types of assets. And the owner's corporation fees are so high as well. So you're running expensive lifts that you need to maintain and operate. You've got high owner's operation fees to run the gardens and the concierges and the gyms and the swimming pools. All those sort of things don't work for investors.
That's very interesting. You sort of gave us a 5 non-negotiables there in relation to what people should be looking at in relation to assessing what sort of real estate they should buy and where they should buy it. And I've never really thought about it in such sort of articulate ways. I think that, this is a broker conversation that our brokers have with their clients. Our brokers by no means experts in these areas, but brokers, in terms of organising a loan for their client, have to have some sense of the property market, at least a sense of it, because the conversation is not about the loan. The conversation is about the property, because no one gives a shit about borrowing money. The only reason they're talking to brokers is so they can buy the property. And your experience, how important do you think it is for a good broker to at least be able to carry a conversation on the property market generally, without being an expert? How important is that?
Absolutely critical. And it, business is all about relationships. So, if you fund somebody into buying a lemon or a pup, and you don't give them any, pull them aside and say, hey, where I'm about long-term relationships, I'm looking after your interests, maybe, don't buy this. Maybe have a look at this, or go and talk to someone about it before you buy. And look, the benefit of that conversation is, and this is what in my valuation business, what I've seen, is that someone signs a contract. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the value. And so what happens is that if they've bought that off the plan, 2 years later it gets built, and then the bank sends their valuer out, and the valuer says, no, it's not worth the contract price, it's worth 20% less. How do you think the relationship then goes between the customer and the bank and the broker? And the deal may not get done. They might lose their deposit. So it's really important to bring that risk to the front end of the equation. It's too late to have a conversation once you've made a mistake.
That's a very good point. And I think brokers have to find places where they can keep up to date with thought leaders like yourself as to which direction the property market's going, and at all times making it clear that they're not property experts, but at least be able to hold the conversation and direct a bit of traffic, maybe back to someone like your website, for example, or to your business, or to seminars that you might hold, or are being just discussed generally somewhere in CoreLogic or wherever. Brokers need to have some insights themselves to be able to hold the conversation with their client about where the property market goes. And I think the thing that you've made very clear today, Greville, is that the property market is complex. It's not as simple as everybody thinks. And probably most importantly, it's dynamic by region, by the subclass of the asset, whether it's an apartment or a villa or a house or a block of land. There are so many dynamics within the property asset class generally that in itself, you need to make sure that you are well educated in this regard. So, Greville, Pabst, I really appreciate your time. And by the way, I really appreciate your generosity in talking to us about these things. And it's actually made me think about a few areas myself in terms of, I like that tiering that you just went through, house, townhouse, etc. I mean, I like that a lot. And you put some logic around why maybe apartments in high-rise with expensive swimming pools and car parks and gardens and concierges are not selling as fast as all the other stuff is selling. Thanks very much. Yeah. I really appreciate your time, Greville.